You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits, a podcast that encourages you to love more on your friends and to further consider the issues that plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and there's something about angst that fascinates me, which is great news since today is all about the angst of Harry Potter. And of course, what friendships look like when there's nothing but dread. Joining me today to talk about book 5 of the series, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, is my friend Haley. Hi, Haley.
Hey, super excited to be here again.
Oh my goodness,
too long.
It's been too long. We discovered off mic that it's been 3 years since Haley joined me to talk about friendships in Game of Thrones, which is one of my favorite 2-part episodes. And can I just say we were right about who was going to end up on the throne? Someone who had friends.
You heard it here first, everyone.
You did 3 years ago before the finale came out. But no, I'm so glad because when we did record that summer in 2019 about Game of Thrones, and then you also were on Fatalities and we did an episode there, you were telling me about Harry Potter and that you each year reread it. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the purpose here is that I think it's so appropriate that you're here because it's just another pop culture phenomenon that you know a lot about. And so how did you come about reading the Harry Potter series?
Yeah, I think my story with Harry Potter is similar to a lot of millennials in that I grew up, that's how I learned to read and how I really fell in love with reading. Mm-hmm. I remember being a third grader and, opening up Chamber of Secrets every time I got a chance and reading the books as the movies were coming out, which not a lot of, people got to do. And I just loved it. It was my first fandom. I consider myself to be kind of a nerd in a few different fandoms, which grew into Game of Thrones, of course, later. But Harry Potter really was my first, introduction to fantasy world, and to have that escape and to not only love reading, but love, the imagination of a totally different world and having that capacity to think beyond what's right in front of us in our reality.
I do have to say, well, first off, if you were doing Game of Thrones in third grade, concerned. But so I'm glad that fandom came later. But there's so much envy from this. Now I'm on the tail end of Gen X, but I am Gen X. But this envy of having these series that you could read as a kid that get you so into reading. Like when I think about what I read as a kid, although I have great fondness for Sweet Valley High and Nancy Drew Case Files and the Babysitters Club, it is nowhere near to the young adult reading that millennials and Gen Z now have to read. So there is certainly, I was a full-grown adult reading Harry Potter and a full-grown adult going to see it on opening night, midnight showings,
Yeah.
But there is something to be said that like, this is part of you and this is how you grew up in reading. And I think that's really cool. Not upset at all.
Well, as an adult now, I shared with you before, I had a tradition of reading all 7 books every summer. It was just kind of like my yearly reset, being in higher education and having that, cyclical nature of an academic year. I love, kind of returning to that world every year. And getting to, pick up different things every single time. But I would say I've probably read the entire series, 10, 15 times by now.
Yes. And you inspired me that summer to reread. And I read through Order of the Phoenix, which is what we're talking about today. And so the next 2 episodes, like I'm in uncharted waters. I mean, I've read them, but only once. And it was when they came out. So I can't wait to see what happens next. But Order of the Phoenix is one of my favorites. And so I think I might have just stopped there because I was like, this is where it can't get better than this, right?
Yeah. And it gets a lot of hate. I mean, Order of the Phoenix is very angsty, as you shared.
But I love
it's the
that.
Longest book. I know, I do too. So when you're putting this together and thinking about what episode and what book, I jumped on Order of the Phoenix just because there's so much there. It's so layered and complex. And I think is very rich in emotion and those themes. So,
and I think that's why I love it so much is that there is some level of, okay, this is a fantasy world, but we all experience some of these feelings that Harry has in this book. And I think you're exactly right. Like after the first 4 books, this is the one it starts to move into more complexities that you don't have in the first books. And so there is a lot of layers to it. I mean, it's almost 900 pages. So this is that's probably why I stopped. I was like, okay, I don't know if I can do a longer book.
Yeah.
But we're going to, that's coming up next. But okay, so Haley, I have an idea of, I think, what house you are, but I would love to know, as you probably wager a guess, I'm Hufflepuff, because I'm about friendship and kindness and loyalty. Woo! And so what is your house?
Okay, so I thought about this a lot, and I think my feelings on it have changed as I've gotten older. But I would consider myself a hat stall. So very, a hat stall. So Neville Longbottom's a hat stall, right? Like there's a little bit of a longer pause because it could have been Hufflepuff, could have been Gryffindor, and he landed Gryffindor. Hermione, between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. I think where I'm at in life now, I would probably lean a little bit more Ravenclaw, but growing up, I always resonated with Gryffindor because
those are the two I thought. I was like, I bet she's a combination of Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and you're the first person to mention other houses. Everyone else who's been on here is either Hufflepuff or Slytherin. And I was like, don't I have any other kinds of friends?
Oh, no. Yes. I'm getting married. So I'm getting married this summer, and my bachelorette party's this weekend, and my maid of honor is doing something with Hogwarts houses and t-shirts. And so she asked everybody going on the trip, what's your Hogwarts house? And so I said, for the purposes of this occasion, I will be a Gryffindor because, I am choosing to be the drama.
You need a little bravery.
Yes, it's my main character moment. I will go fully on my Gryffindor side for this, but we have a Ravenclaw and a Hufflepuff too. So no Slytherins in this party, but
I can't wait to see what this is about. That sounds like an amazing bachelorette party, and your friend sounds awesome. But I'm Hufflepuff, and if I was to sort of wander into another house, I'm usually Ravenclaw. So like a Huffleclaw or a Ravenpuff, however you want to, depending on day. But I love that having you here so that we can talk about another pop culture phenomenon, that I have a friend that is also outside of Hufflepuff and Slytherin. I was like, there's got to be someone outside, right? And then also to be talking about a movie that we have a lot of respect and appreciation for. So let's get into it. And so at the top of the episodes, like we always do, we are supportive of the Harry Potter community because the people who make it what it is, and we do not support the author who consistently shows her hate of the trans community. And so I just want to make it clear that this is about the story and the community and not that individual. And of course, as I do always, Alysa's recap. And this time it's almost a 900-page book that I'm trying to recap. So I know I'm going to miss something. So Haley, you're going to have to come in with some additions, addendums. Like, I know there's a big storyline that I've already missed in this recap, but here we go. Okay. Cedric Diggory is dead and the Dark Lord is back. Or is he? The Daily Prophet and their loyal readers do not seem to believe what happened to Harry in the Goblet of Fire, nor do they believe Dumbledore, who is the one sharing Harry's experience. And Harry is left to fend for himself as he's been ignored and neglected all summer by his friends, his mentors, and his godfather. He and his cousin Dudley are attacked by 2 Dementors. What are Dementors doing outside of Azkaban? First off, hello. And Harry is expelled from Hogwarts for summoning his Patronus in front of a Muggle. When he finally joins his friends, they're staying in the Black family home, also known as the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix, the secret special group who is fighting against Lord Voldemort and his loyal subjects, the Death Eaters. Their world and their school as they know it are about to change. Harry is cleared, of course, of all charges, because that would make for a really interesting book, right? For summoning his Patronus so he can return to Hogwarts. But will he want to? Answer, no. Hogwarts is now under the control of maybe the worst person in the whole wide world, maybe even worse than Lord Voldemort, and her name is Dolores Umbridge. She air quotes, teaches defense against the dark arts, but not really. And she's quick to torture Harry for what he calls his lies about the Dark Lord being back. He's been banned from playing Quidditch, is not learning anything in classes. Dumbledore seems to be avoiding him. Hagrid is keeping a secret. He's swamped with schoolwork as owls, their tests, take place at the end of the school year. And on top of that, he's experiencing dreams or nightmares where he's seen Mr. Weasley be attacked by a snake. And he keeps dreaming about a door at the ministry where a prophecy is being stored. My God, this is intense. I can't believe this all happened in 900 pages. So will Harry survive school with Umbridge running things? Will he survive his owls? Will Harry survive the angst? Will he survive the prophecy? And will he be able to save his godfather, Sirius? Oh my God, I'm tired. How did I do?
I mean, you did great. I mean, that is a lot. That is quite a summary for 900 pages, 870 pages. That's a lot.
The only thing I think that I would add in here is that he then has directed to Professor Snape to try to protect his brain and mind from being possessed by the Dark Lord. I didn't get that in. That's about the only other thing I'd add.
Yeah. There's a lot there. There's a lot to cover.
There's a lot to cover. And of course, amongst all that, there's obviously friendship to be discussed. And so, Haley, let's start with the core friendship. What do you think about their relationships in this 5th book of the series?
Yeah. Well, I think, they're as individuals, they, in the book before this and in the 5th one and kind of going on, they're in that life stage also of just that awkward transition and that emergence into adulthood.
Yes.
So I think that is important to acknowledge and how that might play into a lot of their relationships. There isn't as much outright strife between them individually. I know you talked about this in your discussion of the 3rd book, but Hermione and Ron have a lot of conflict. And then in Goblet of Fire, Harry and Ron have a lot of conflict. And then we get here where it's just like the world's falling apart. How are we preserving, our relationships? Mm-hmm. And Harry's on the outside. And that's kind of where we start with Order of the Phoenix, is the question of, he's separated all summer, mm-hmm. knows that they're together with the Order. He's getting little information. And then, everything happens with his Patronus. And it's the question of, am I even going to go back to Hogwarts with Ron and Hermione?
Could you imagine if he didn't? So does he go back with the Dursleys? Would he be able to stay with Sirius? But what would his life be like if he didn't have Hogwarts and specifically his friendships with Ron and Hermione? I think even though one of the things is in the book, and this is on page 18, he even has a hard time being able to produce his Patronus because you're supposed to think of your happiest memory and thought. And he's like, what if I don't get to see my friends again? Right. And so he's like, but I'm trying to save me and my cousin, even though his cousin sucks, but he's trying to save them both. And he's sitting there going, how can I even think about anything happy? I'm sitting here, I'm not with my friends. They all know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. No one will talk to me. And on top of that, I think what it does sort of miss the mark, or something that should be addressed, is the fact that he saw his peer, Cedric Diggory, die, and then he immediately is going back into the Dursley situation, which is mm-hmm. traumatic and abusive as is. And then, how do you manage these feelings of the Dark Lord is back, right. Cedric Diggory is dead, and what role he might have had in his friend's death? And so that's a lot to manage. And mm-hmm. and I joke and say I like the angst. Okay, Harry, we get it. There's a reason for your angst. But then there's also just straight up teenage, middle school, high school vibes that just everyone's weird and uncomfortable. Uh-huh. And we start to see it in Goblet of Fire with the ball, and they have their dress robes, and poor Ron has to wear the hand-me-downs, and they're asking girls out, and it's just hot mess express for everyone. Yeah. And that's just generally our collective experience. Right? Yeah. But then on top of it, you're managing these traumas. And I don't think I think that needs to be addressed because he could have really used his friends at this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's the Order of the Phoenix is the first time where like Harry is on his own journey the whole time, right? But and like to your point, Harry Potter would not be Harry Potter without his friendships, particularly with Ron and Hermione. And he knows at the end it's going to be him in Baltimore. He was the one that had to see Cedric die by himself and face Voldemort yet again alone. And that theme comes up a lot throughout Order of the Phoenix, especially after he learns of like what the prophecy actually is. But that's always met with, I can't do it without them at the end of the day.
Yeah, because the thing is, like, he was even a little bit on, like, as you mentioned, he was on that journey with the Goblet of Fire, like, in that last, contest or, when he's taken to that, I forgot the word, cemetery, where the Dark Lord is. And, like, even before that, he's, like, trying to figure out all these tasks, at first on his own, but he really relies on Hermione a lot in the Goblet of Fire. And it's like, they all bring something to the table and there's this level of like, they're partners in crime. Like they come as a group. And so for him to not have those people there, I think is especially hard for him. And then I think that's where we get a lot of the teen angst, like the thinking like it's kind of like no one loves me. And like, so he says like on page 8, if he was lucky, there would also be owls carrying letters from his best friends, Ron and Hermione, though any expectation he had that their letters would bring news had long been dashed. Quote, we can't say much about what, obviously. We've been told not to say anything important in case our letters go astray. We're quite busy, but I can't give you details here. There's a fair amount going on. We'll tell you everything when we see you. But when were they going to see him? No one seemed too bothered with the precise date. Hermione had scribbled, I expect we'll see you quite soon inside his birthday card. But how soon was soon? As far as Harry could tell from the vague hints in their letters, Hermione and Ron were in the same place, presumably at Ron's parents' house. He could hardly bear to think of the pair of them having fun at the Burrow when he was stuck in Privet Drive. In fact, he was so angry at them, they had thrown both of their birthday presents of Honeyduke's chocolates away unopened, though he had regretted this after eating the wilting salad Aunt Petunia had provided him for dinner that night. So, like, he's not making the best decision. Like, he's throwing things away. This is like tearing up pictures. Like, that's what I think of, like, just like these things that you're going to regret. And so he's not in the best state of mind. Like, he's feeling very isolated and he has no contact with Dumbledore, Hagrid, or his godfather. So I think that this is a really sort of dark moment for Harry individually. And then he does arrive and they're in Sirius Black's family home. And so here he was thinking they're having a blast at their Burrow. They're in this dusty, nasty house that and then they're not allowed to be part of any of the Order of the Phoenix meetings. So like Harry's thinking they're off having like the greatest time. And it's like, no, I almost would prefer to be alone than have to do all the things that I don't know. It seemed pretty bad.
It did. Expectations versus reality. It's definitely a thing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when we have those expectations versus reality when we're young, that maybe, like maybe when we're a little bit older, we might be able to think of some other alternatives and maybe he's just not quite there. But then we sort of discover like within the core friendship that there's some things that happen in this book that are part of organically happen in our relationships. So as they enter their 5th year, Ron and Hermione are named prefect, but Harry is not. So this is quite the interesting time for Harry being like, why wasn't I selected to be prefect? But then also being like, oh my God, you guys, this is amazing. Like, how do you balance the feelings of envy and like being happy for your friends, right?
Yeah. And I feel like we've all had that moment. I think this scene just is so authentically captured and just the description of, Harry speaking in a really hearty voice and that's not his own, not sounding like himself because he just can't truly find it within himself to be genuinely happy for Ron in that initial response, because he's a star. You know, he everyone expected it to be him, and he always gets everything. He just, you know, was the Triwizard champion, all of these things that just consistently come his way. And Ron is just, you know, there as his buddy, his sidekick, and he's not number one ever. And so how does Harry meet those feelings of isolation now, knowing this is something that Hermione and Ron have, and I go through all the tough shit and I don't have anything, you know? And so there's just this moment, and I flagged it as well. When everyone leaves, he's trying to be happy. It's this fake happiness. He has a moment to himself, and, you know, he thinks in his inner dialogue, that, but maybe, said the small voice, maybe Dumbledore doesn't choose prefects because they've gotten themselves in a load of dangerous situations. Maybe he chooses them for other reasons. Ron must have something that you didn't. And he opens his eyes, stares through his finger at the wardrobe's clawed feet, remembering what Fred had said. No one in their right mind would make Ron a prefect. And he gave out a small snort of laughter. And a second later, he felt sickened with himself. Yeah. And so I just think that there's just such a pure inner conflict there. And then shortly after that, Ron comes back in, and his voice turns back to normal. And he can genuinely say, Ron, I'm so happy for you. And so I think just everyone's had that moment, whether it was like, you know, some award you were expected to get, or, you know, some sort of recognition, or, you know, growing up that your friend gets, or there's an opportunity that comes by them and not you, and you have to find it in yourself to be genuinely happy, and how hard that can be sometimes.
Yeah, I like the different voice, like the hearty voice that's not quite genuine, reminds me of the Friends episode where Ross is like, I'm fine. Like when he discovers that Joey and Rachel are, I'm fine. Like, he's like, I don't know why my voice is doing that, but I'm fine. And he's like, okay, non-verbally, that would tell us that you're probably not fine, right? And so So that's the first thing. That's what it reminds me of, is like trying to get to that genuine space in which to communicate that to your friend, which I'm sure it's like, I am excited for Ron and Hermione, but then there is like, why was I not good enough for this? And what I think is really interesting about this is that maybe this is the first time Harry is also experiencing where he is feeling envious of Ron, where all along it's been Ron doesn't have the money. He wears the hand-me-downs. He doesn't get the attention. Harry gets the attention. And so, like the Quidditch, like Ron and like the Triwizard tournament, right? Like there's all these moments where we've seen Ron have this natural feeling of envy for the things that his friends are experiencing. And maybe this is the first time Harry's experiencing it, and he doesn't quite know what to do. And I think he ultimately gets there, but I think that's the other thing, is to realize that envy is a natural feeling, and that we as individuals could determine, what is that going to do for us? Is that going to make us, maybe it leads to conflict or some other negative emotions and feelings, or is it something that then leans to motivating us to do our best elsewhere? Harry's going to come out because he has to, he has all the stuff he has to deal with. And I think that's what Dumbledore says in the end. I figured you had enough to worry about. Yeah. Rather than be prefect. But there is something about seeing them get the badge, as you mentioned off mic, and being like, oh, like this is real and I'm not part of it. But that's one of the things I have to say about their friendship in this book. Very much seems like there are these moments. I'm upset with you because you weren't able to tell me anything. I'm upset because I'm not prefect. Y'all are arguing. You're nagging me. But they're fleeting moments, right? Like they are, I think in the end, a way to think about them getting on each other's case. Like Hermione's on their case about studying, and she has laid down the law. She's like, I am not letting you copy my notes, right? You are on your own, buddies. And they're like, I think even Ron says to Harry, do you think she's serious?
Yeah.
Harry's like, yes, I think she's serious. Okay. And so I think that there's these moments of like nagging about things, like you need to do this. And she is compared to Molly Weasley, Ron's mom, several times in this book for being the one to worry or to say something or to maybe even play devil's advocate a little bit. And then there's sort of some pushback. But I think like in the end that there are bigger things that are happening, right? The Dark Lord is back. They have the common enemy of Dolores Umbridge, who is just terrible. Like, I swear to God, she's worse than Voldemort.
Oh, absolutely.
in a lot of ways, right? Where she tries to come off as innocent when she is evil. Right? At least the Dark Lord embraces that he has the dark
just,
side.
Here I
am. And so I think that they might allow these things to happen and just kind of get over it because there's bigger things for them to worry about. There's bigger fish to fry than whether or not Ron or Hermione or Harry said something that hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's a really dynamic shift in the series too, because, in previous books, you'd spend a third of a book with, two of them out of the trio, at least having some sort of major conflict that spans across several chapters. And I think with this, they recognize they don't have time for that because there's all this outer conflict and, their world as they know it is changing. And so they have to band together, and that, that kind of carries them out the rest of the way.
And I think that exactly. And I think that because at the beginning of the book, Draco is still Draco, so he's terrible. And then you bring in Dolores Umbridge once they hit Hogwarts, that there's something to be upset about every single day. And it's not Ron, Hermione, or Harry, right? You have Draco and Harry who have been arch nemesis since like they met. But I think you described Draco as low key in this one. Like he's there, but his role is not as big as it has been in previous books. Like he's still terrible. And I saw it as two ways of being terrible. Number one, just completely atrocious and leading all of the hate towards Ron once Ron joins the Quidditch team, right? Just making fun, leading, just bullying and teasing and all this kind of stuff, just absolutely nasty to Ron. In fact, the Slytherin house has a cheer or a chant, if you will, and it is because they think he's so bad at Quidditch or just want to psych him out. This is on page 407. It says, Weasley cannot save a thing. He cannot block a single ring. That's why Slytherins all sing, Weasley is our king. So it sounds nice, like Weasley is our king, but what they're saying is like, he helps us out because he sucks. So Weasley was born in a bin. He always lets the quaffle in. Weasley will make sure we win. Weasley is our king. So mean.
But the Gryffindors do take it back.
Yes, they do.
They reprise that.
Because there was a game they won. I don't think they had a really good Quidditch track record this season.
Bad season for them.
Bad season, which I'm like, and I was trying to think, is there any Quidditch after this book? Because things just go to shit, right? But in this one, it starts out like, okay, Ron's the new keeper, and like he's good when he's good, but he is not very confident. So like, and I kept thinking what happens yes, there is Quidditch in book 6 because there's something that Hermione does to sort of like support him. And that's what he needs. He needs confident. He needs people to boost and lift him up because when he is not boosted and lifted, he is terrible.
Yeah. And it gave so much more dimension to his character too. They didn't capture that in the movie for the 5th one, but I was really pleased to see it be a big part of 6 in the movie because it was a huge scene in Order of the Phoenix in the book of his introduction to Quidditch and Ginny's introduction to Quidditch.
Yes.
And so against Harry being, that being taken away from him and the twins not being able to play.
They've been banned for life. Umbridge, I'm telling you, like
terrible.
I think like in the book, like she has these decrees, like a few of them, but in the movie, I think they really capture like the annoyingness of these decrees that she makes by having them be like 70 of them. Like she just has all these rules and things, like they can't do anything, right? And so that's one of them is like all organizations, teams, and groups are disbanded and they have to go ask for permission to bring back Quidditch. And then after a tussle with Draco and the rest of Slytherin, Harry Potter and the Weasley twins are banned for life. And so I also think there's these moments of envy that Ron gets to play and that Ginny is playing, as a seeker in his role. But he's so used to being able to do all these things. And now he has all these adjustments on top of all these other terrible things that are happening. The second way that I think Draco really plays a role in this book is that Umbridge, which this is terrible. Okay. This is not teaching. This is not even this is terrible for schools. But Umbridge pulls together students to be part of her Inquisitor squad. So basically they get extra credit to be like her goon squad. And in this book, they have the students collecting other students and manhandling them. And I'm like, this would be a lawsuit. You cannot have other students be like, I caught this one doing that. No, you can't do that. And then taking points away from Gryffindor and stuff. I was like, oh, Draco, never change. You're perfect.
Yeah. And then they really, that juxtaposed against Dumbledore's army. And so you really have the battle of the students on both sides. And then of course the external battle of Order of the Phoenix and the Death Eaters and
so it's they have
raise them young
squads, right? Who's gonna populate Order of the Phoenix? Oh, probably Dumbledore's army. Who's gonna populate Death Eaters? Probably this Inquisitor goon squad, right? And I think that just kind of shows the kind of control and power and manipulation that Dolores Umbridge has of using students against other students and really pushing her own agenda, which should not be part of Hogwarts at all, right?
Right.
And she comes in and I put in my notes, this lady is a piece of work. Seriously, she is using truth potions. She's having them write lines, which I think this is one of the worst things I've seen in this movies, right? Is that he has to write lines. I had to do that one time too, where you write the same thing over and over again. And he has to write, I must not tell lies, but it's magic. So he's writing it, but it's etching into his own hand. And so that is so cruel. It's torture. And so I think what we see is that Draco then starts to sort of act underneath Umbridge and sort of moving that along. And I think one of the things that we see here is that at a certain point, they become interested in bringing down Dumbledore's army. So I think that's what we should talk about. I think that is the key to this book in terms of friendship. There's so much to unpack here.
There is so much to unpack with Dumbledore's army, but what a better showcase of friendship and relationships than this group of students, all united. We talked a little bit about, their different motivations at first for being in Dumbledore's army. There's some of them that just want to know the tea of Cedric's death. His friends are people that admired Cedric and they think that, by getting in with Harry Potter, you're just going to tell us what actually happened.
Yeah.
And are there for those motivations. Some are motivated by who's crushing on who. And I want to be there because Ginny's there. And some of them are the nerdy students. They are not getting good defense against the dark arts and they're not going to pass their OWL. And so I got to learn something. Some are the Quidditch buddies. So it's just such an interesting across all but, most of the houses, all but Slytherin. So we've got Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff,
of course,
and Gryffindors that are coming together. And it just brings together people from so many different motivations and backgrounds and houses under a common purpose, which I think is just overall really interesting about Dumbledore's army.
Yeah, and this is what seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, is Hermione's idea, and then sort of Ron and her talk Harry into it. So I feel like if he's the face of the company, so to speak, she's the one running things, right?
Yes, but she's concocted it.
Yes, and so they meet these folks at on a Hogsmeade trip at Hogshead Pub, and it's like off the beaten path. And they bring people there, and yeah, they're trying to figure out, like, is he going to talk about Cedric, or what is this going to be about? But what they're trying to do is, Umbridge, who is now the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, she will not teach them anything practical. She will not actually teach them to defend themselves. And so basically, and this is, again, the worst teaching ever, is just going to class and being like, read chapter 3, like, and there's no need to talk. And it's like, this is not how you teach. This is not how people learn. And so
there is a practical examination none of us are prepared for.
Exactly. Like, they have the owls coming up and they're just supposed to be all theoretical. Like, I don't think so. But she's saying, like, what do they need to defend themselves against? The Dark Lord isn't back because Harry Potter lies. And so, because Harry's been through all of these events with, Triwizard Tournament, the Chamber of Secrets, all these different things, that he has the practical experience. He's actually produced a Patronus charm. And so he becomes teacher, right? He's going to teach them how to protect themselves, how to do jinxes and other spells to protect themselves. So you have all these people coming together. And then one of the things is, if you are part of a group and you name it, and then in addition to it is a secret group, this is how you bond, people. This is friendship 101, right? How many of us in like second grade had like a secret friendship group, or right? Like, or you name it, you have a name for it. Whenever I teach small group communication, I'm always like, you should name your groups. You're going to be more invested, right?
Yep.
And so this is a great way for them to build. And to be honest, I'm happy to see them making friendships across houses, right? And I think you kind of talked about when we were off mic, this idea of like bringing friends together during wartime, like that this is something that they have to do because the Dark Lord is back, and how are they going to protect themselves and protect each other? And so I think that what we see here is that this is, maybe it's just to populate Order of the Phoenix, but I feel like that level of uncertainty that exists, where you have Umbridge who's in control of everything, you don't know what's happening with the Dark Lord, and then specifically Harry and his friends are not getting information from Dumbledore or Hagrid, that there's this level of uncertainty, and I think they feel like they need to do something. And by building this group together and doing it together, they are taking action. And so I think taking action makes people feel better. And so, but there's a lot of different relationships here. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Outcast Friends?
Yes. So the Outcast Friends, namely Neville and Luna, and I tossed Jenny in there too. I think Jenny is showcases being very popular in the books, right? She's joins Quidditch in Order of the Phoenix, and she's got a lot of friends across houses, but she also will be friends with anybody and kind of flow between any group. And so she finds herself with this outcast group that includes Luna Lovegood and Neville Longbottom. And at the very beginning of Order of the Phoenix, because Ron and Hermione are prefects, they have to go and, check all the train corridors and things like that. So he's on the train without Ron and Hermione for the very first time. So
what do I do?
What do I do? I don't use my hands. I don't know. And so he finds himself sitting in a compartment with Neville and Luna, and he's like, and then Cho Chang walks by, and he's like embarrassed because he's like, oh, I'm not with my cool. I want to be like telling a joke and have my cool friends laughing at me, but I've got this stink sap on me from Neville's weird plant, and then Luna's reading a Quibbler upside down. Things are just real weird, and so. But it's interesting that these are the outcast friends, and I think that. Talking earlier about everyone comes to to Dumbledore's army for different motivations. I think their motivation was, I just need a place for friends and I need to find acceptance. And so, but they're the most fiercely loyal, because at the very end, when it's time to go do it for real and it's time to go to the ministry, it's them, and they put their lives on the line and they go and fight for real at the ministry.
I'm so glad that you had brought up this idea of these outcast friends, because in some ways Harry is an outcast, or he feels like an outcast some of the time, but that they definitely have things in common. And I think this is something that happens around this age group where it's like, you want to seem cool or you want to seem this way. And so you have these friends, but they don't fit the bill in terms of what is maybe accepted or popular or whatever the case is. And I think like that's Harry's feelings of being embarrassed in front of Cho when he's with these people. But I would say by the end of the book that I think he sees, I think he respects Ginny. I think he'll see her more clearly in the next book. But I think for how he sees Luna and Neville, I think is a level of respect. One of the things that I respect the most about Harry Potter is that he learns about Neville's parents in the last book from Dumbledore, and Dumbledore tells him not to tell anyone, and he doesn't. And some people would say, well, I could tell Ron and Hermione. No, he doesn't tell him because it's not his business. And I think he understands that Neville went through something terrible with his parents, and they're in the hospital, and we do meet his parents in this book. And like, I think Harry has these moments of like wishing Ron and Hermione would just shut up or, just let Neville be, because they're just asking questions. And sometimes it's like, read the room, right? Like, I think Neville doesn't want us to know about this. But then also Luna she's such a lovely weirdo.
She is.
I love Luna, but people are terrible to her, right? And they mistreat her. And I think that, Luna and Neville and Harry have things in common because they've all seen death. And that's something that we see in this book, because they can all see the horses or the thestrals that are pulling. We always learn that there's these pulled, what do you call it, buggies, but there's no horses attached to them. Oh, there are, but you can't see them unless you've seen death. And so I think that bonds them together as well. And you're exactly right. When they come to the end and they're looking for the prophecy in the ministry that Harry has been dreaming and having nightmares about for months, that they're the ones that are like, let's do this. And he even's like, okay, guys, like, thanks for the support. And they're like, hey, were you just saying that we needed to have Dumbledore's army, or are we going to actually do this thing? And so they do not shy away from the conflict that comes. And they went through the ringer in this end scene at the ministry. I mean, and part of me was like, just the way that it's written and just like how we understand Neville, he just is like clumsy and just doesn't have it all together, and people might wonder why he's Gryffindor and this, that, and the other thing. But man, does he thrive in Dumbledore's army.
He does.
And I'm like, Neville is coming to his own. And then I think you start to see Harry respecting them more. And I think that, as you said, they're loyal. And I think he is used to Hermione and Ron being loyal, but that there are other people. And that's what is necessary during these war times as well, is that loyalty to resolve the issues at hand. And we see some friends sort of go back and forth. So my personal favorite is Seamus Finnegan, who my dog is named after, right? The most obscure Gryffindor, right? And I'm like, my dog's named after him. But boy, does he have it quite the moment in this book where his mom doesn't even want him to return to Hogwarts because she doesn't want him to be around Harry Potter and Dumbledore, and that they don't believe that the Dark Lord is back. And you sort of see this like, I don't want to be friends with you because I don't believe you. And so I feel like that happens in these difficult times is, who do people trust? Who do people believe? The misinformation, the disinformation. And so we see that with Seamus. And I think that really upsets Harry that people don't believe him. And so
it implicates his friendship with Dean too, because he's in a difficult position of, being friends with Seamus and close with Seamus and being caught in the middle.
Yeah. Oh yeah, poor Dean. He's like, okay, guys, I don't know what to do here. But Seamus comes around and he comes back and he does join Dumbledore's army. And I think maybe like that's his moment of his teen years, or he had to figure things out, or Are you going to just follow what your mom says? Or are you going to believe Harry for yourself? Or do you both have these developments, and what are you going to do next? And he joins Dumbledore's army as well. But Seamus isn't the worst friend in this book, though. Okay, so Harry and Cho kind of like each other, right? And
have their awkward first date moment in the tea shop.
That was
I read back
terrible.
over that passage and I was like, but this is truly tween. Like this is early high school awkward first date when he like has built up in his mind, like, I'm really into this girl. This is perfect. And then when it's actually the moment's finally here, it's absolute disaster.
It's like, what do you talk about? Why is everyone around me kissing? Does that mean she's going to think I want to kiss her? I have to hold her hand. And then she wants to talk about Cedric. And he's like, I don't want to talk about Cedric. And then Cho's crying about Cedric. It was Hot Mess Express. But I thought was really interesting was that Harry said in the book, like, I don't need to talk about Cedric. I've talked about him with Ron and Hermione. And so I think for her, because she had gone to the Triwizard Ball, like the ball with Cedric, and were they seeing each other? I don't know if they were officially dating or not, but like having that relationship with Cedric and Harry being that one connector, like, I think she does like Harry, but I think it's complicated by, like, I think she wants some closure and that she needs Harry to help. And he's like, no, thanks.
Yeah.
Get your own friends, but her friends are terrible. So let's talk about Marietta, because
Marietta.
Terrible.
I wish we could have gotten Marietta cast in the movie just because I want a face to this like person in the book that is such an underwritten character in the movies.
Yeah, like they totally do Cho Chang dirty in the movie on this, because they basically place her in the role of Marietta. And so basically I think Cho wants to join Dumbledore's army because of, she does believe that the Dark Lord is back. She probably wants to do it because of Cedric, but I think she also has a little bit of a crush on Harry. So I think like all these reasons. So it's just like, you got to bring a friend. And Marietta's like, I don't know how to do this. And so she signs the parchment, though, that Hermione has them sign, not knowing that Hermione jinxed it. And basically, Marietta rats out Dumbledore's army to Umbridge. And I love in the book because Harry's basically like, you really should choose better friends. Because he knows his friends aren't going to rat him out. Even Hermione is having like a moment or is, backlit, whatever, nagging on him. He's like, my friends wouldn't do that. And so Marietta does become a victim to that jinx. And there was something growing out her face, but it spells sneak. And so,
it's like these big boils that.
Oh, gross.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why. That would have been disgusting in the movie.
A lot of CGI there.
Yeah. But I think like she basically rats out the group, and although Umbridge is never able to catch them red-handed, she is able to bring them in because of what Marietta has done. And so she tattles and like, lady, this is like life or death, right? Like, this is like the Dark Lord is back, like no messing around. And she went to like the worst person ever and was like, this is what's happening. And then I also believe that Umbridge probably used some truth potion on her.
I allude to that.
I love in the scene, though, there are some Order of the Phoenix members there who are adjusting her memories as she's answering Umbridge's questions so that, they don't get too much in trouble. And then Dumbledore is like, well, it's Dumbledore's army, not Harry Potter's army. So he takes blame.
Yeah, it's his badass exit.
Yes. And then he's like, okay, bye. But I think the core of this book, and with all the things that are happening, that this group coming together and doing what they do, they're able to like go to the Ministry and they fight off Death Eaters as they try to get this prophecy and essentially save Sirius, which, spoiler alert, does not happen.
No.
I mean, they've been tricked. Like Sirius wasn't in trouble, but then came to the ministry because the kids were there.
Yeah.
And then Bellatrix.
And the backstory doesn't get really fleshed out in the movie in the way that it does the book. And it's just gut wrenching in the book. Whenever you get he was in the house the whole time, Creature told him that he wasn't there. And it just, there's so many layers to it. And just, it's such a huge emotional blow for Harry at the very end when he learns, that the only reason why he was there was because he was coming to save Harry and his friends.
And that was a moment of like, I understand why they win everything because you don't want to be wrong. But Hermione was like, what if he's doing this because you kind of like to save people? And so, like, Voldemort does know like Harry's jam. Like, okay, let me save this girl who's in the water for the Triwizard. That's not your person.
Yeah.
Save your person and move on. Right?
At the same time, though, I think that, one, it furthers the plot, but there would have been something else, right? Like, had it not been that, the whole time Voldemort is literally in Harry's head and is going to find some sort of outlet to draw them out. So it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, that's true. And I think like one of the things that makes the loss of Sirius so devastating is that Harry and Sirius were just getting time to be godfather, godson. And so we got to see some of that. And then like even visually in the movie, seeing like them hug each other and that sort of thing. And Harry doesn't have family. And I mean, he doesn't want to claim the Dursleys as his family, right? And so here he has Sirius. But I think what's interesting is the layers of their relationship is that Sirius is the godfather, but he is constantly like living. It's almost like he's reliving his life with Harry's dad, James, because they were like best friends when they were at Hogwarts, along with Lupin and etc. And so I think like he's using Harry as a way to relive his like glory days. And so I think sometimes he forgets that Harry is actually his godson and not someone who can impulsively do the things that he wants to do because he's an adult, right? Like there has to be a line, and Molly Weasley is the one that's there to remind him of it. And I don't think Sirius is very appreciative of that. But I think Sirius is kind of like, hey, buddy, like I understand like Harry looks a lot like James, right? That's where he gets everything from, right? But they're not the same. And I think for Harry, it's exciting maybe to be treated more like an adult than maybe anyone else does. Like, I think being left out, you feel like a child. You don't feel like the age that you are. You feel like you're missing out on things. And I think Sirius is treating him like an adult. But the problem there is Harry isn't a full-grown adult, right? And so there had to be some sort of balance. But this is one of my favorite parts of the book because it does include other friendship, and that is the friendship of Sirius, James, and Lupin at Hogwarts, also with Wormtail or whatever. But
no need to mention.
We don't like him.
We don't talk about Wormtail.
We don't talk about Wormtail. But I love it because Snape is asked to help Harry like block his mind so that Voldemort can't possess him. And so he takes his little wand and pulls out his memory and put him aside so that Harry doesn't get to him. And then Snape is called away and Harry's like, let me see what Snape doesn't want me to know.
As Harry does.
As Harry does. And I was like, probably rubbed off by Sirius. Like this is something Sirius would do. And what I think is interesting is that Harry gets to see Snape's memories of basically his father and his mother alive. And he sees them with Sirius and Lupin. And what he discovers is that maybe his parents aren't as great as he thought they were. Specifically his dad.
Specifically James.
James Potter is a jerk. Okay? Like, I think he is like Draco, but he's Gryffindor. And it's like, he is arrogant. He is mean. He bullies Snape. And then I think Harry starts to feel bad for Snape. Like, why did his dad treat him this way? And that maybe he isn't exactly like his dad. And that maybe Sirius needs to remember what it was like when they were younger, and that they were kind of nasty to Snape, and Lupin let it happen, right? Like they didn't do anything to stop the bad behavior, and that they were doing it because they were bored. And it's like, y'all need an activity then besides Quidditch, because like mistreating people isn't it. And I think this is the moment that Harry realizes like maybe his dad wasn't so great. But not only that, I think as readers, we might start to understand Snape's point of view, and that he isn't just sour grapes per se, and that he isn't just, I mean, he shouldn't be mistreating Harry, and he's kind of nasty to Harry, but like his dad was terrible to him. And so, so Snape and Sirius both need to separate Harry and James from each other. They are not the same person, but I think you start to understand Snape a whole lot more.
And we have to build empathy for Snape for reasons that will be mentioned in a later episode.
Yeah. Oh God. Oh gosh.
But yeah, I think that this showcase, and really from Prisoner on, there's those like glimpses and like that those small windows into that past, and you know, the early trio before our current timeline, and it's, I think that compounding makes Sirius's death so much more gut-wrenching, because shortly after that there was a whole elaborate plot so that Harry could get up to Umbridge's fireplace and use flu powder to talk with Sirius, because he just has his heart ripped out, and he has to go to that father figure and the friends of his father to be, you know, get some answers, because he's only been able to piece together these parts of his past for you know, the last couple of years since Sirius is introduced into his life and Lupin's introduced to his life, and he knows the context of those relationships. And so, and that was the last conversation he got to have with him before going to the ministry. So that's also just really sad.
Yeah. And this is one of the things that, like, if we could have another Harry Potter story from the world, this is what I would want it to be. I would want to go back to the original trio of James, Lupin, and Sirius. And I also want to see like Molly Weasley kicking it.
Forget Fantastic Beasts. I want this timeline.
Yeah,
this is the timeline I want.
This is the story I want. But I think it's interesting, like you said, like he turns to these other people to piece together his life, and these father figures. And what has been the case until Sirius and Lupin have been introduced in his life, it's been Dumbledore and Hagrid. And in this book, it's like non-existent. And it fuels the flames that are burning in Harry's little angsty heart. Okay, because Dumbledore is avoiding him. Like, he won't even look him in the eye. And then Hagrid's been missing for a portion of the school year. And then when he comes back, he has a secret. And so those things, those relationships are stunted and are sort of paused in this book. And maybe it's because part of angst is coming into your own. Maybe it's developing who you're going to be. And so you have to do it by leading your own little army and teaching your buddies jinxes and how to produce a Patronus. But he doesn't have Hagrid. He doesn't have Dumbledore. And for reasons of Order of the Phoenix, Lord Voldemort, they stay away. But I think this really hurts Harry in this particular book. And then to lose Sirius, I think he's losing. It's probably like losing. He never had his parents, but it's like you finally develop these relationships and it feels like you're losing your parents because he doesn't have them in their life.
Yeah. There's a lot there, but I think that, you know, while there's a loss of relationships and characters, there's the introduction of characters, and, you know, people like Luna, like we talked about with Luna and Neville, that become even more prominent than just a B character. Like they are part of the core group moving forward into what becomes the darkest time of the series of like, oh, shit's getting real now. Like we have to like really, and that's kind of when you really realize who your friends are and where loyalties lie. And, you know, those introductions of new people really become prominent and shine in this book and moving on to end out the series.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, okay, maybe everything changes when Harry lands back at the Triwizard Tournament with Cedric, who is now dead. But I think this book really moves us forward into those dark times, and that that maybe Harry can be a little bit more independent, but that he's still going to rely on his friends, and that we now have the prophecy that we know, and Harry knows that he's either going to die at the hands of Voldemort or he's going to kill Voldemort. There is no other way. And so how do we get to that moment with or without our friends is where we're going next. And so, oh my goodness, I've only read the last 2 books once, so I don't even know what friendship looks like. I can't wait to see when it becomes harder and darker how important friends are. And I think that we saw that in Game of Thrones, that friendship was what won the day. And I'm going to wager a guess that happens here too. But I don't know. So I'm excited to see what happens next. But this is also a book that I love because I think that there's this collective experience of not feeling included, that we have this angst, that we want to have our friendships, but sometimes they can be hard, that there are terrible people in our lives that we have to navigate on bridge. But what other thoughts do you have about Order of the Phoenix?
Yeah, I just think, it's so... It really kind of brings out the complexities in everybody. And I think that this is one of the deepest moments in the series. And it really takes that turn into darkness, but also just the depths of emotion that they all experience. And I think that their character developments really start to heighten for them collectively, but also as individuals. We see, you'd never imagine Hermione Granger to break the rules, but she does in this by forming Dumbledore's army because she has to, because they all have to. And so I think that there's just so much for each of them that really furthers and they kind of grow up. I mean, it's that the whole Harry Potter is a coming of age series. And this is where I think it really takes that step into our world is changing and we have to respond to that change.
I absolutely like the coming of age aspects of it. It's like, it does follow the track of life, right? Like, we're going to move on to the next sort of phases. And for me, what I think I'm most interested in seeing the character development will be for Ron. I think that is really interesting to me. And then sort of quasi knowing what comes next, but not being entirely certain, having only read them each once, is seeing like the Dumbledore Harry relationship and how they work together in the next book. So, oh my goodness, I'm nervous.
A lot of really important seeds are planted in this for, Harry's ultimate outcome, thinking about his relationship with Sirius and thinking about how he and Lupin move on from this, the trio. There's a lot there. And then, of course, Snape also. I mean, there's a lot of things that are, subtly planted, and Dumbledore's army. A lot of the relationships that were built here become so important in the big, big battle at the end. And if they hadn't learned and, built that capacity for defensive magic, but also for, having that understanding of like, oh, I'm not just a student. We're not just playing around doing spells, whatever. Yeah. But there's a bigger thing happening. If they hadn't had that moment here, I don't think they would have gotten to the end. So Order of the Phoenix really is a huge turn.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Snape, because that is something that I feel like I don't fully grasp his whole journey from where I stand now. And so not only, I guess, seeing where Ron goes, I'm interested in Snape. So, it gets me excited, but that makes me think, like, listeners, what do you think of Order of the Phoenix? Do you have angst about it, or is it one of your favorites, like Haley and I believe? And what do you think about friendships? Is there something that we missed? Is there something you agree with, disagree with? Let us know. And you can find me at Friends with Alysa on all areas of the interwebs. On Twitter, I'm Friends W Alysa, as well as the webpage. So let us know what you think. And until next time, think about how Harry made it through the angst with his friends, because without our friends, who would we be?
listening to Best Forevers. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and of course, share with a friend. Please be sure to follow Best Forevers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Best Forevers Pod, and I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas on Twitter. You can always find the podcast webpage for more information at bestforeverspod.com, and share your stories of friendship by emailing me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the movement to love on our friends more, check out the podcast on patreon.com/bestforeverspod. Now, friends, check out this recommended podcast that you must get in your ear holes immediately.
First impressions can take as little as 6 seconds to make. But in these fleeting moments, whose amazing stories don't we get to hear? That's where Beyond 6 Seconds comes in. Join me, Carolyn Keel, as I uncover stories of life and creativity, triumph and struggle, with the focus on neurodiversity. I'm featuring neurodivergent people whose stories shatter misconceptions, break stigma, and showcase vibrance and diversity. To listen, go to beyond6seconds.net or follow the show in your favorite podcast player.